Okay, so it's finally time to take a look at GoPro's Mission 1 Pro, and it's safe to say that a camera hasn't interested me this much for a very long time indeed. So in this video, I'm going to get to the bottom of the hype. I'm going to take a look at the good points and the not so good points. I'm going to compare it in low light to see how it compares with the competition, and we're going to see whether those slow motion modes really are that good. So grab a drink, because this is going to be a long one, and roll the reel. So I just want to give a big shout out to Gav Barker for throwing those tricks and allowing me to film those slow motion sequences for the intro. I have uploaded some original files from the camera for all of you to download, and I've put a link to those in the description below so you can look at the footage for yourself firsthand and evaluate it for yourself, and practice grading and all that good stuff. Also, I just want to mention that I am doing a live Q&A about the camera tomorrow, which is the 27th of May, at the time of this review going out. So please do click the notification icon for that, and I hope to see you there. Just ask me any questions from a user perspective about it, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. And if I don't know the answer, I can switch the camera on here and we can take a look in real time. So yeah, if you can join me for that, that would be absolutely fantastic. So anyway, on with the main review. So in recent years, GoPro's market has been challenged by the likes of DJI and Insta360, and users have been commenting on how the company appears to have fallen behind compared with its rivals. But it's not just rival action camera manufacturers that have been encroaching on GoPro's market. It's also been smartphones. As they become more capable, more and more people have been using them for filming their lifestyle, their vlogs, and their holidays and whatever else. But the action camera still has a place. So what GoPro has done with the Mission 1 series is introduce a set of cameras that can be used in a more professional setting, as well as giving full-time creators a very compact camera system that can produce a very high quality image indeed. Now, the Mission 1 Pro is the camera that I'm looking at here. I'm going to be looking at the ILS version a bit later on, but for now I'm going to be looking at the Mission 1 Pro and seeing what it's really capable of. So, where to begin? When you first take the Mission 1 Pro out of the box, it's unmistakably a GoPro. It looks like any other action camera, and it's actually a very similar size to the Hero 13. It's the same height, but it's just a little bit wider. I think it's about 5mm or so wider than the Hero 13 Black. So it is still very much a camera that you can use as an action camera. There's nothing stopping you from putting this on a helmet or on a chest mount on a mountain bike. It can do all of the duties that the Hero 13 can do, but of course you get the extras like the better low light performance and a much higher dynamic range, as well as those slow motion modes. Now, at the heart of the Mission 1 Pro is the new GP3 SoC, and this is what produces the magic. It allows image processing that we haven't seen before in a GoPro camera, and in fact, it promises to outdo anything else out there right now. But we'll see as we go along in this review. Furthermore, there is the 1-inch sensor. Now, I know I keep calling it a 1-inch sensor when it isn't physically a 1-inch sensor. Some people call it a 1-inch type sensor, but in the vernacular that's used around sensors, 1 inch is the correct terminology. It all goes back to the days of tube cameras where we talk about the outer diameter of the cathode ray tube. So it is still perfectly valid to call it a 1 inch sensor, even though the physical size of it is nowhere near 1 inch. But that's a debate for another time, and maybe I can make a video on the history of it. But yes, it's completely valid to call it a 1 inch sensor. And this particular sensor is brand new, I believe. It's an 8K sensor, although I've been told that it has a slightly higher resolution than that to account for the hypersmooth. So you get a 10% crop with hypersmooth, and then you get a true 8K resolution out of that, up to a 4:3 aspect ratio. It also uses a quad Bayer arrangement as well, which is different from most cameras, which again should contribute to a much higher quality image. And as I've gone into in previous videos, it also features dual ISO output. And what this means is it has 2 gain circuits which it can combine, one which is better for the shadows and one which is better for the highlights, and it combines those 2 in a single frame capture. So this isn't like normal HDR where you're merging 2 different frames and you can end up with all sorts of haloing artifacts. That's not how this works. This is very similar to the system that's used in the Arri Alexa, for one example. So it's usually something that's seen on higher end cameras or higher end mirrorless cameras in some modes. Now, GoPro has been thinking about the connectivity in terms of a professional sense. So you can connect any USB mic system to the camera straight out of the box. You'd no longer need the media mod in order to do that. But you can also monitor video up to 4K 60 from it. So, that could be really useful for professional production scenarios where you might want to wirelessly transmit the video from the cameras when they're hidden away somewhere or they've been placed in multiple different positions. An example that was given to me, love it or hate it, was the Beast games, and apparently they are very interested in this camera for use on that. There's also full timecode sync capabilities, and the camera will also record up to 32-bit float audio internally as well. So this gives you quite a lot of flexibility in how the camera can be applied and used in many different situations, not just for stuff like vlogging or action camera style usage. But if you do use the media mod, you then get 3.5mm microphone input jacks, and you get another built-in microphone into the media mod itself, which has various different pickup patterns, but I haven't been able to use that. I don't have that media mod, but it does seem to have a lot going for it if you're going to be using the camera more extensively, if you want to record from multiple microphones and that kind of thing. Now, when you first power up the Mission 1, just like the Osmo Action 6, it's a little slower when you first power it on. It's still way quicker than the Hero 13, but once that initial power on has been done, from then on in, for most of the rest of the day, the camera will pretty much power on instantaneously, which is a big step up from the previous GoPro cameras. So if things are happening quickly, you can generally be sure that the Mission 1 is going to start pretty much immediately. Now, the interface itself is very recognisably GoPro, although it has changed a little bit. You now have very quick access to resolutions and frame rates from the back screen instead of having to go into the main settings. You also have a number of different intelligent modes. So, for example, there's a dive mode, and if you go down deeper into the water, the camera will detect the difference in colour as you descend deeper, and it will compensate for that. You also have tracking modes where the camera will just automatically lock onto a face within frame, and it will pan around the sensor effectively, and it works pretty effectively, and the quality from it is really good despite the fact that it's cropping in quite a lot into the sensor. And you have sports POV modes and all the rest of it, but all of these modes can be configured individually. And if you don't use a particular mode, you can take it off the selection screen so you're not cluttering up your interface with modes that you barely ever use. Something else that I really like about the new interface is that when you go in to change your settings, if you're exclusively shooting in GP log, for example, or you have your sharpness set to low and your noise reduction set to low, you can click a little icon to apply to all, and it will apply those settings across the board to all of the different modes. The only exception is the 960 frames per second mode, because that can't use GP log and is also limited to the high bit rate rather than the max bit rate. So that's the only mode that isn't affected by this, but for the rest of them, you can apply those settings across the board without having to go individually into each different mode and set them all up. So another feature that I've been absolutely crying out for GoPro to put on its cameras for years now is fast charging, and it's finally here, and it makes a massive difference. So in around 20 minutes or so, you can have your camera pretty much charged up to 80% and it's ready to go. I haven't done a precise timing on it, but it's pretty fast. But it's great to have this on a GoPro finally, and makes a big difference. You know, I keep forgetting to charge my cameras a lot of the time, and just having this ability to fast charge makes a big difference to me. So really good to see that it's finally been addressed on this camera. So GoPro has made big claims about the camera having around a 5-hour battery life if you use the 1080 30 frames per second mode, and also around 3 hours in 4K, as well as minimal thermal shutdowns. Now, if you use the camera in the very high frame rate mode, such as 4K 240, eventually it will shut down, but it will go for quite a while before doing so. We're not talking about, you know, a 5-10 minute run and then it shuts down. You can keep going for quite a long time. But if you're using the standard modes, you know, I've had the camera running in the 4K 24 mode without airflow. It's just been sat on a table and there's been no shutdown. It's just kept going until the battery has run out. So thermal issues with the Mission 1 Pro are a thing of the past. So in terms of the thermal performance and battery performance, I'd say that this is living up to everything GoPro has promised. Of course, if you are going to use the slow motion mode extensively, the battery time is going to take a hit because it's using a lot of processing power. But that said, I did spend a period when I was filming Gav Barker doing his freestyle stuff. I was there for like an hour and a half, and I was shooting in all of the different high frame rate modes pretty much continuously. There wasn't much of a break between the shots that I was taking, and I still had around 30% of the battery left at the end of it. Now, low light performance is another area of which there's quite a lot of interest with this camera. Now, I'd been told that GoPro's been spending a lot of time tuning this low light mode, trying to get a balance between the image processing, not making it look over processed, but also still getting a nice clean image in very low light conditions. But GoPro is keen to point out that it isn't about seeing in the dark, it's about having better low light performance you can intercut with other cameras. Now, I haven't had time to do an extensive comparison between the Mission 1 Pro and the Action 6 and the Ace Pro 2 yet, but I did do a brief comparison with the Ace Pro 2. What I noticed was that the Mission 1 is very much on par with the Ace Pro 2 in terms of the low light capability. The differences come when you start to pixel peep a bit. I think there might be some tuning to be done with the GoPro. I did find that on this shot where I walked past a petrol station, if you look at the detail closely, the detail on the signage and logos on the petrol station on the Ace Pro 2 were very cartoonish in a way and quite coarse, whereas the detail on the Mission 1 Pro was much more subtle and much smoother. Those two shots were compared in the standard color profiles on the camera, so the natural color profile on the Mission 1 Pro and the standard color profile on the Ace Pro 2. Now, when I put the Mission 1 Pro into GP log, that's when things really started to look good. You can grade it, you know, you've got a 10-bit color. You know, once that's done, it doesn't look processed at all. If you zoom in, you know, and pixel peep, you'll be able to find faults with it. But the place where I filmed this was very, very dark. You know, it wasn't an easy situation for the camera to handle. And I think that it's every bit on par with the DJI and the Ace Pro 2, but with the added benefit that you can use 10-bit GP log at a much, much higher bit rate than those cameras. If you look closely at the stabilization, you can see a little bit of jitter. I did set the camera to the maximum shutter speed, so it tries to maximize the shutter speed and minimize any jitter. There is a little bit visible, but as I say, I was really pushing it in this light. You can select other modes as well, so that if you are on a gimbal where the hypersmooth jitter isn't such a problem, you can turn the hypersmooth off. You can actually set that low light mode to prioritize motion blur over, that sort of stabilization aspect. So, you've got a lot of options here. It's very tunable to how you're using the camera. And if you turn hypersmooth off and you put those cinematic blur options on, you're going to get a much less noisy image. You're going to get a much more natural looking image as well. And the low light performance is just going to get better in those modes. So these tests show that GoPro has caught up with the competition. I would like to do a more extensive comparison between the cameras, and if you would like to see that, let me know in the comments and I'll try to get that done as soon as I can. Right, so let's talk about slow motion, because slow motion is the big feature on the Mission 1 Pro, and it's something that I've really been looking forward to, and I'm particularly looking forward to trying out on the ILS version of the camera, because the creative possibilities there are pretty insane. But for now, it's the Mission 1 Pro with the wide angle lens. What can you do with it? Okay, I spent some time, as you saw from the intro, filming Gav Barker doing tricks on a wave, and I was trying all the different slow motion modes for that. What I've been finding is that the 4K 240 FPS mode is to die for. It is so good. The Pocket 4 has 240 frames per second on it in 4K, but you can only use a standard color profile. This, you've got 10-bit log in all of the slow motion modes apart from the 960 frames per second mode. The 4K 240 looks absolutely fantastic. And what's even better is that you can use the 2x zoom on it. It's pretty much a lossless 2x zoom like you'd see on the Action 6 or on the Pocket 4. And it works very well indeed. It means that you can get the kind of slow motion shots that don't look like they're from an action camera. So up to 2x, it works really well. If you want to get rid of that action camera look, you're not going to really lose out. All it needs is a little bit of sharpening in post, or if you don't want to be bothering with that, just set the camera to the medium sharpness and away you go. But either way, the 2x zoom on this in combination with the slow motion is exceptionally good. So that's 240. What about 480 frames per second? Now this drops down to 1080p. You can still use 10-bit log with that mode. And let's make no bones about it, 480 frames per second is very slow indeed. There is the 960 on the camera, but believe me, 480 is incredibly slow. I'm not even sure, when you're going to be using it a lot, but it's there as an option in continuous form. Something that was brought up when I went to the GoPro event was the fact that if you have a professional high-speed camera like a Phantom, you have a pre-record function. So when you don't know that an event is going to take place or an action is going to happen, it's already pre-buffered that footage and you hit record and it lays that down to the storage. Now in the 960 mode, it works in a 10-second buffer, but it's not a pre-record buffer. So one of the limitations of the 960 mode is that at the moment, you're going to have to preempt what's going to happen to be able to capture the action within that 10-second recording window. But with 480 frames per second, you can use the hindsight function, which gives you up to a 30-second pre-record buffer. So you can effectively use that as a pre-record trigger system. So if you have an action happen unexpectedly, or you've been waiting for something to happen and you haven't been able to anticipate recording it, then you do have that hindsight function with the 480 frames per second mode. But what about the quality of it? How does it stack up? Now, for the eagle-eyed among you, you might have noticed on some of the shots in my intro, there was some coarse aliasing going on. And the reason for this is because I was trying to push the camera to see what I could get out of it. I'm testing the camera out, so I want to see what its limitations are. And for some of those shots, I used the 480p mode and I used the 2x zoom on it. And that's because in the 4K modes, I found that the 2x zoom was really good. So I wanted to see how it worked in those 1080p high frame rate modes as well. I wouldn't recommend it. You do see all the aliasing and the jaggies going on. So in the future, I would keep the camera in the full wide setting, either wide or linear, in those ultra high frame rate modes. But if you stick to the wide angle or just the linear, the quality is remarkably good. There's a little bit of aliasing going on if you look at the really fine detail. Now, what you can see here is a shot that I took of myself walking. Not really the best subject matter for ultra slow motion, and I was tempted to do a camera conspiracy style run with this. But what I've done here is record 480 frames per second, and you can see it's a little bit soft straight out of the camera. I've got the sharpness set to low so that I can adjust all that in post. But once I add in some sharpness, in this case, I used DaVinci Resolve's brand new AI sharpening tool, which is absolutely amazing, the Ultra Sharpen tool. It looks really good. You could use this, it's perfectly usable. I would say that when you're using these ultra slow motion modes, you really should try and get as close as possible to your subject. You know, action cameras are never good for distant subjects anyway, but particularly with these slow motion modes, you want to try and fill the frame. So you need to get as close as you possibly can to the action in order to make the best of these modes. But when you do, the quality is more than acceptable. It's incredibly good. I mean, if you consider, particularly if you take into account the 960 frames per second mode, the next camera up, I think, that is capable of doing anything like the frame rates that are on the Measure 1 Pro is Blackmagic Design's Ursa Mini 12K. And even then, it can't go up to 960 frames per second, or even 480, I don't think. Maybe you can correct me on that. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I can't remember if that's the case. But either way, when you consider that, you know, you're talking about a $7,000 camera compared with a $700 camera. That's pretty big. And if you think about what you'll be able to do with the ILS version, I think this is going to be the absolute goat of budget slow motion camera systems. Now, obviously, we don't know what DJI has up its sleeve or Insta360 for the Ace Pro 3, but for the moment, the GoPro would appear to be the absolute king of slow motion recording on a budget. Something else that is important to point out, though, when it comes to shooting at high frame rates is don't expect to use these in low light. Anytime you use a camera in frame rates like that, you need a lot of light. 240 frames per second in 4K seems to work generally absolutely fine in most daylight conditions, as do the 480 and 960 modes. But if things start becoming a bit overcast or a bit dingy, or you're shooting in, you know, anything like a lower light condition, don't expect these modes to look good. They won't. The camera is going to have to bump up that ISO. So just be careful about where you're using these modes. But if you use them in good light, you'll get some exceptionally good results from them. When it comes to the 960 mode, if you want to try and intercut that with your GP Log 2 footage, you can still select the flat color profile, which will give you a much more natural looking image than the so-called natural profile. Although with the natural profile, you can tune the tone mapping, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Now, I just want to talk about the minimum focus distance for the camera. GoPro says it's around 60 centimeters, but I've done some basic tests here, and I've found that really at about 40 to 50 centimeters, it's generally sharp enough. It looks sharp enough to me, but it is going to be a much further minimum distance than you will be used to on a lot of other action cameras. As we know, the reason why the DJI Action 6 has a physical iris on it is to make sure that you can get close focus when you need to, but also get the maximum low light performance when you need to as well. But the GoPro isn't too bad when I've been using it in a vlogging scenario, even on the end of a short selfie stick. It's been absolutely fine and perfectly sharp. So I don't think this is something to be hugely worried about, but it is something to be mindful of, that you do have to hold it a bit further away than you would do with a lot of other cameras on the market. Another feature on the Mission 1 Pro that brings it in line with other cameras on the market, like the Action 6, is the tracking mode. Now, what this does is it crops into the sensor and it tracks around and follows you. Now, you don't even have to highlight yourself in order for it to lock onto you. It will automatically recognize you as a subject, as a human face, and it will track you from then on. It does seem to be very accurate at doing the tracking, and the quality of it, despite the fact that it is cropping in, is exceptionally good. I did notice that as I was moving around, you see this backlight situation while I was out running, and it did sort of struggle a little bit with the exposure on my face, so I go dark in some instances and then lighter in others. But generally it does a really good job of keeping you in the frame, even when you make quite extreme movements with the camera. So I was quite surprised by that, and it is a good way of making sure that you're in the center of the frame when you're filming. And just like every mode on this camera, you can use the 10-bit GP log with the max bitrate as well. You can't do that on the DJI Action 6. On the Action 6, you can adjust the sharpness and the noise reduction parameters, but you can't use D-Log-M on the Action 6 when you use the tracking mode. So that's another plus with the Mission 1 Pro. Now, when it comes to those picture profiles on the camera, the default picture profile is the natural color profile, and people know about this from the previous GoPro cameras. It's a slightly modified version of that to take in account of the extra dynamic range of the Mission 1 Pro's sensor. Now, the tone mapping is more subtle than it is on previous GoPro cameras because of that extended dynamic range, but now you have control over how aggressive it is. So by default, it's set to what's called balanced, and the camera basically evaluates the scene and produces the best tone mapping for what it thinks is going on and happening. And overall, it seems to do a nice job. The image is certainly way more natural looking than the Hero 13. When you go into this backlight situation, as I've got on these shots that you're seeing here, you can see my face looks much more natural than you would expect on the GoPro cameras. Previously, everything looked quite coarse. It didn't really do skin tones any favour, whereas here it looks pretty good. But if you want that more aggressive tone mapping, you can put it into sport mode, and that gives you that much more bombastic, contrasty look. And then the next one up is you've got a face option, and that optimizes the tone mapping to be kind to faces. But there's not a lot of difference between that and the balanced, I find. But if you want to be absolutely sure that you don't end up looking like you've had a very long night out, I would say to use the face tone mapping priority when you need it. There's also a dive setting as well, and that is the mode that intelligently detects the different color changes as you go deeper and compensates for those. Now, audio-wise, the camera has 5 microphones. There's a stereo pair on the front. There's one on the side, which is a self-draining one for water sports. And there's one underneath, and there's one on the back as well, so that if you are talking to camera while you're doing a vlog and you're talking to someone else, it will pick you up behind the camera as well. Previously, in high wind conditions, the cameras haven't performed particularly well, despite the automatic wind filtering that's going on. The Ace Pro 2 is really good in this regard because it has a physical wind filter along with the digital processing. But what I've been finding with the Mission 1 is that I've used it in some pretty gusty conditions, and I'll show you an example in just a moment of that. If I put it onto the voice focus mode, even though you can hear the wind, it's not really affecting the clarity of my voice. And believe me, these wind gusts that you're about to hear, they were pretty strong. So it was a pretty testing situation for the camera. And yet, as I say, although you can hear the wind, my voice is still perfectly legible. So it's a bit breezy today, so I thought I'd do another voice test. I've got the camera set to the voice focus in terms of the audio processing. It's obviously GP log, big gust of wind there, so it'll be interesting to see how it picks up my voice. I did do some tests with the running as well, but it's as well to do this in a different situation as well, see how it comes out. Now, I need to do a lot more testing of this to be absolutely sure. For example, can it cope with going really fast on a mountain bike and picking up the voice? Then, that's another, quite testing test for a camera like this. And I'd be interested to know, how well it does in those situations. So again, this review video is my initial review, but I will be coming back to the camera to do more in-depth tests on it in different situations. So staying with audio, the camera does have a lot of settings with regard to how you can record sound. And this sort of alludes to the more professional space in which GoPro wants to sit this camera. You've got full control over whether the limiter is on or off, so you can completely disable the limiter and you can completely disable the auto gain circuit as well. So you can set your audio up precisely, you can set the levels to where you want them, and of course you've got that 32-bit float internal recording, which is pretty impossible to peak. So you've got a lot of options there and flexibility. And when you plug in a USB mic into the side of the camera, you can then set up each of those individually. So you can set up your USB mic and the gain settings and limiter settings on that. And then you can also set the internal mics on the camera separately as well. So you've got those two different sources there that you can completely independently control. Now, the overall image quality of the camera, what can I say? It is really good. The GP Log 2 is extremely gradable, and, I've been putting some different looks on it, and, it's very, very flexible and very clean as well. It's a very clean image. I've always liked GoPro's color science anyway, but this, with the extra dynamic range, it really is a cut above the previous cameras. And, I probably won't be using the natural color profile that much, but it still looks pretty good. There's also a vibrant option as well, and a cinematic option. The cinematic one, I'm not completely convinced of, because to me, it doesn't really look that much different to the other modes, but maybe that's something GoPro is going to develop further. I'm not sure, but anyway, the natural color profile is good for general users. If you don't want to be bothering with grading. And as I say, you've got that control over the tone mapping too. So you're not stuck into a set way of the camera processing the image. You have a lot of flexibility here. Now, that's the other thing with the Mission 1 Pro, is that it can use Labs firmware, and that means you have the ultimate control over the image. You've got lots of functions there. It's not just about image control, it's about functionality control as well. The amount of control you have over the noise reduction and that sort of thing in the Labs firmware is absolutely just on another level. For most users, the settings that are available in those menus will more than suffice. In fact, I'm not sure if I'm going to install Labs onto this camera, because I'm not actually sure what I would do with it, because I have so much control over the image within the camera itself. Perhaps I might tune the sharpening a little bit, so maybe just go between the low setting and the medium setting. That might be something I'll play with, but in general, you do have so much control over the image just straight out of the box. Now, you can shoot 8K up to 60 frames a second, or you can have 8K in the open gate format, 4:3 at 30 frames per second. And that will give you the maximum amount of real estate and resolution for being able to reframe for social media and different formats. Interestingly, though, you can still use the digital zoom with the 8K mode, and it actually still looks really good. So I'm not sure how this is being done. The GP3 processor really does seem to be doing some very complicated image processing techniques. because technically you shouldn't be able to use the 4K zoom in 8K because you're already using the maximum resolution of the sensor. So be interesting to know how GoPro is doing this, but suffice to say, if you use the 2x zoom in 8K, it does work pretty well. So are there any negatives to the camera? Well, for one thing, I'm a little bit disappointed that there's no front touchscreen, because when you're vlogging, the front screen on the Action 6 is really useful, and of course on the Ace Pro 2 you can flip up the screen and access all the controls there. So you still do have to go to the back of the camera in order to change the settings. So I would have liked to have seen a front touchscreen in this model. Am I nitpicking? Not everyone's going to use it. But for me, I would find that pretty useful, particularly if I'm mounting it in a car, or any other vehicle, because then sometimes you do need to play with the settings, and with only the rear screen being accessible for controlling the settings, you have to take it off the mount and then play around with it and put it back on again, which can be a little bit inconvenient in those sorts of situations. One thing I did find with regard to the battery and the charging system is that when I charged the camera with the battery in it and the camera powered on, I found that it got very hot, and the camera did actually automatically stop charging to protect the battery because of the heat. This doesn't happen if you take the battery out of the camera, and it doesn't happen when you have the camera turned off and you're just charging through the USB port. But it was something that happened to me when I had the camera turned on and I was charging with the battery in it. It did become very hot indeed, and as I say, I had to halt the charging of the battery. So I'm not sure whether this is something that can be fixed in firmware. Hopefully it is. But just be careful of that if you want to power the camera externally, but you have the battery still in it. Just be very careful of that. One oddity with the picture settings on the camera that I noticed is that when you go into 1080p mode in general, you can't select 10-bit recording. So it seems to be limited to 8-bit recording if you go to 1080p in general, which means, of course, you can't use GP log either. And it also seems to be limited to the high bit rate rather than the max bit rate. Another oddity that I've noticed is that when you're using the specialized modes like the low light mode, or you're using the zoom function on the camera, what you'll see on the LCD display can look quite low quality. Like, for example, in the low light mode, you might see loads of noise, or in the zoom mode, everything might go very blurry. But as soon as you hit the record button, all of a sudden, the magic of the GP3 kicks in and you get a really good looking image. So when you start using the camera in situations like low light and the low light mode, don't look at the LCD and think, oh my God, this looks really noisy and horrible. Because as soon as you hit the record button, all the magic kicks in and your image is going to look just fine. Something that has come up in comments on my previous videos is whether the camera could use the micro SD express cards that are on the market now. Apparently the interface that's used within the camera itself is not compatible, so it can't be added via firmware. So the answer is no. Unfortunately, you can't use micro SD express cards with the Mission 1 Pro. I have had occasions where I've gone into something like the 960 frames per second mode, which can only use 8-bit recording and maxes out at the high bit rate rather than the max bit rate, and then I've gone back to 480 or 240 frames per second, and it's left me in the natural color profile with the bit rate set to high and the bit depth set to 8-bit. Now, although this video is focused on the video side of things for the Mission 1 Pro, I do want to speak about the stills capabilities as well, just briefly. It's something I'm not going into great depth into in this particular video, but I want to talk about some of the features that some of you have been asking about in my previous videos. So you can have up to 50 megapixel stills, or if you want the best noise and low light performance, you can use 12 megapixel. An important thing for those of you who do things like night lapses, the camera can now go down to a 30-second shutter, which is a massive improvement over the previous cameras. It means you can really get true nighttime photography. The only thing is you don't have control over it. There's nothing in the menu that allows you to manually set the shutter to that speed. But if you are in those low light conditions and the camera feels that it needs it, it will go down to those very slow shutter speeds. So this should mean that things like nighttime lapses are really viable with this camera. It's something, again, I haven't been able to test out just yet, but I'm going to be very interested to give that a go when I'm next down in Pembrokeshire, because the skies there are absolutely fantastic. But it's just something of interest that I know some of you have been asking about in previous videos that I've made. So yeah, it can go down to a very slow shutter speed. It's just you don't have absolute control over when it does. So who is the Mission 1 Pro for? I think this is a camera that is really going to suit people who know cameras. They like to really have the ultimate control over their image. Now, despite the marketing, as I said earlier, the Mission 1 Pro can be used as an action camera, and I will certainly be using it as an action camera on my kayaking helmet as well to get really high quality imagery there. It's just you can't have extra lens mods on it like the wide angle lens mod that you have on the Hero 13 Black, and if you did, it would be pretty enormous on the front of this particular camera. But you can use it as an action camera if you want to, but it's not going to suit people who really want a camera that they can just pick up and shoot with immediately. So while you can absolutely just pick up this camera and shoot with it with the default settings, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that at all. I think that if you are somebody who, you know, really isn't into the technicals of shooting with a camera, I think the Hero 13 or one of the other action cameras is going to probably be better suited to you. The Mission 1 will suit people who really want to be able to delve into the settings and tune the image to how they want it to be. But that said, you know, you can shoot it in the default settings with no problems at all if you want to. But the people who are going to get the most out of this camera are the ones who, you know, really do like to nerd out on those settings and have the ultimate picture control, grading and post and all that business. In effect, what we have with this camera is the camera that people have been asking GoPro to make for years. I know from the comments there are still some haters out there, but you know, this is absolutely what, you know, people have been asking for a very long time, and GoPro's finally come through with it. To be honest, you know, apart from a couple of niggles with the interface here and there and the lack of that touchscreen, I can't really find a lot not to like about it. You know, maybe the ultra high slow motion modes might be a little bit soft out of the camera, but as I say, you can get those sharpened in post and they look really good. And you know, there's a little bit of aliasing here and there. But given the fact that to have these same frame rates on any other camera, you're going to have to spend over $7,000. I think we can forgive it a little bit, you know, for not having absolute phantom quality, slow motion image quality. But as I say, it is still a very high quality slow motion image in 480 and 960. And as I say, in 240 frames per second, the image is absolutely stunningly good. So yeah, when the Mission 1 Pro was first announced, I said GoPro is back. And I do absolutely mean it. This camera is really good and I can't wait to test it even more in depth. And as I say, I'll be doing more videos comparing it with the other cameras on the market, even though it isn't strictly directly competing with them. But I know a lot of you will be interested to see the results of those tests. So I'll get on and do that. And if you have any particular tests that you want me to do, then please do let me know in the comments. And don't forget that I have uploaded some original files from the camera for you all to download and play around with yourselves. And that link is in the description. And just to end on If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Channels like this live or die by the support that you, the viewers, give us. I do have some affiliate links, so if you are thinking of buying this camera, then please do consider using my link below. It comes as no extra cost to you, but it helps me out a lot, helps keep the lights on, and allows me to keep on making videos like this. But anyway, I hope this video has been useful to you. There is a lot more depth I can go into with this camera, with the testing, as I say, and I will be looking at doing those extra tests. But for now, if you've liked this video, please do consider liking and subscribing to my channel. And I'll see you all in the next video.